The 4 decades that Johnny Carson spent in the spotlight saw him become one of the most famous hosts and performers of all time. From the 60s through the 90s, he ruled late-night television. Despite his extensive interview and conversation history with numerous noteworthy figures, the famed talk show presenter is notoriously enamored with one legend in particular. Johnny Carson's intolerant guests and his purported favorites will be discussed in today's film. You should seize this opportunity at all costs. Continue to observe. We should establish Johnny Carson's identity before moving on to the main point. Corning, Iowa was the birthplace of John William Carson, who was born on October 23, 1925. Homer Lloyd Kit Carson and Ruth Elizabeth gave birth to him in the middle of their family. When he was 8 years old, his family moved to Norfolk, Nebraska, and he spent his childhood there. Carson has had a passion for and talent for the performing arts ever since he was a tiny boy. And who doesn't love magic? Carson, then 12 years old, did just that when he found a magic book. After that, he bought a magician's kit and tried it out in front of his family right away. As we begin this game of chance, particularly his mom, who even sewed him a cape to wear to his performances at the neighborhood Kiwanis Club, was there for him no matter what. He made his performing debut when he was 14 years old, charging $3. After that, he quickly had a plethora of other assignments. Carson seemed to have already been picked by fate, given his success in Hollywood. Under the pretense of being a midshipman, he attempted to hitchhike and was penalized $1.50. After joining the United States Navy on June 8, 1943, Carson was sent to the Pacific on the USS Pennsylvania. He was no longer famous after this. His job throughout the war was to decipher encrypted signals as a communications officer. Additionally, his amateur boxing record of 1,501 was rather good. It is possible that he has a boss. Carson continued to amuse, nevertheless, and even went so far as to suggest that doing a magic show for the U.S. James V, former Navy Secretary. His career reached its pinnacle with Forrestal. Even the charming and sour Forrestal could laugh at him, which impressed the future talk show host. After the conflict ended, Carson decided to join the fraternity Phi Gamma Delta and take magic classes at an L. After that, he started receiving $1.25 for each appearance. He originally planned to study journalism, but after a few months, he changed his major to speech and drama since he wanted to perform on the radio. Carson began his career in broadcasting in 1950 after earning his degree at WOW Radio. After his morning TV show, The Squirrel's Nest, premiered, Carson's potential was obvious, despite his lack of experience in the profession. As a result, his career skyrocketed. Johnny Carson's show, a popular but budget-conscious Carson production, was his next show to host. Who Can You Have Faith In? Ahead of his Who Do You Trust triumph. In the time between Jack Parr's departure and the permanent replacement, NBC asked him to anchor The Tonight Show. The chance was turned down by Parsons, along with many others, due to the immense pressure to do 105-minute interviews. In February 1962, NBC finally signed him. Following that, the events were detailed. Up until May of 1992, Johnny Carson was the host of the show known as The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. Andy Kaufman, Ellen DeGeneres, Eddie Murphy, and Jim Carrey were all aided by Carson during their time on the show. While hosting the late-night show, Carson has interviewed a plethora of famous people. Still, there was this one man that the host detested. One of the British comic book characters' names is Bob Hope. The legendary centenarian Bob Hope has been performing for nearly 8 decades, and his many talents include comedy, acting, singing, and dancing. Creating competence. It was mentioned, wasn't it? Hope presided over the Oscars more times than any other actor in history, a total of 19 times. All of this was accomplished by this British-American entertainer who lived to be 100 years old. Despite going by Leslie Town's Hope, he was just as famous as everyone recalled. A member of a modest family, Bob Hope came into this world on May 29, 1903. He proceeded to sing and perform stand-up comedy. He was doing street dancing as a means of subsistence. He came in at number 6 among 7 siblings. He was just as versatile as Carson for a short time. He even tried boxing in Pecky East while dressed like a suit. During his time as a lineman in 1921, Hope had to undergo reconstructive surgery after a tree broke his face. This gave him his distinctive look later in life. He began his career performing in vaudeville and Broadway musicals before making the transition to radio in 1934, mainly with NBC. He appeared in films from 1934 to 1972, but it wasn't until he began hosting regular TV shows in the 1950s that his career really took off. Critics, viewers, and fans alike lauded him as an innovator in American stand-up comedy, praising his quick wit and comic timing. Also etched in people's minds are Hope's renowned self-deprecating remarks, in which he would typically begin by praising himself before bringing himself down. Carson has never warmed up to him, even in his latter years, despite everything that he has accomplished. Deep down, he's just a funny guy. Even though Johnny Carson disliked Bob Hope, he never said it publicly. The famous talk show host clearly disliked the second option, though. The obvious didn't become clear until a specific book came out. Bob Hope was the performer of the century, and Simon Schuster published the biography written by Richard Zoglin. Bob Hope was widely thought to be one of Carson's favorite guests in the 1970s and 1980s because of how often he appeared on The Tonight Show. However, the reality is somewhat different. He was very unpopular with Carson. Though he had his reasons for not liking Hope, the talk show host did respect him. To start, Hope's outward appearance is consistent throughout. Some kind of spiritual initiation is taking place in him. The comic would sometimes abruptly exit the stage as the credits rolled, serving as an unexpected guest on the show. After that, he'd quickly start a conversation with Carson using his prepared quips and then display a video montage of his upcoming performance to get everyone excited. As if he were constantly on the go, Hope would also go just as quickly from the show. Every single one of the guests, and the host in particular, must be absolutely exhausted from all of these appearances because this act continued throughout. There were many similarities between Hope and Carson. Having said that, they were never actually colleagues or friends. Producer Peter LaSalle of The Tonight Show went on to explain that although he appreciated Hope's position in the entertainment world, Carson was not a huge admirer of Hope's work. They were the top performers on NBC at the time, and these two guys were carbon copies of each other when it came to their comedic techniques. In contrast to Carson's more complex comedy, Hope's focused on current events with news gags that avoided political sentiments. When it came to hosting Hope, the latter had a natural gift for improvisation that he lacked. The latter's routines were written by his group of writers. Hope's evident lack of improv abilities greatly hindered his ability to generate unplanned humor. Hope was Carson's sole rival among NBC stars, and Carson knew it. This made the two men rivals in a way. Conversely, Hope, a nighttime sensation on NBC since 1950, was enjoying a great run. So Carson couldn't deny that. Hope was also NBC's most popular radio host in the 30s and 40s, according to popular culture references. One of the numerous reasons Carson despised the other man was his near-guaranteed presence on The Tonight Show without a preamble, something Hope could manage with surprising ease. I can tell you that he was always trying to sell something, and he had something to push practically all the time. Carson's irritated tone lingered in LaSalle's mind each time Hope booked himself into the show. Carson, the talk show host, would always tell the producer, "No, you can't turn down Bob Hope." This was because the comedian knew that NBC officials greatly revered Bob Hope because of his role in the network's rise to fame. Nevertheless, in an effort to keep the peace, NBC allowed him to make an appearance on the show whenever he pleased. An annoyance to Carson was the tardiness of Bob Hope's arrival. Plus, the performance continued uninterrupted even as the comedian's memory began to deteriorate in his twilight years. Hope wanted Carson to keep up his act, so he handed him a list of questions he wanted answered, and they had to be asked in a certain sequence, leaving no space for imagination. Biographer Richard Zoglin said in the comedian's book that Hope's failing vision and hearing made cameo appearances increasingly challenging in his latter years. Johnny had to carefully read the notes his staff had given him because he frequently struggled to grasp Carson's inquiries. If he asked it out of sequence, Hope might respond with a different inquiry. Carson was naturally irritated by this development because one of his many abilities was making up jokes and engaging his guests in real conversation. Carson would talk about his time working with Bob Hope in his memoir, describing how he hated the interviews because they were so scripted and thorough, citing all of Bob Hope's and Don Teason's does. This was because the show's ratings would drop whenever Hope was on it. In addition, he disregards Carson's nephew and the show's producer, Jeff Solzing, who has warned against using highlight clips longer than 2 minutes, but who is adamant about using 5. Truthfully, Johnny Carson has been involved in a number of high-profile feuds, including those with Wayne Newton and the affluent Joan Rivers. Still, Bob Hope was definitely not his favorite guest. Considering that Johnny Carson's least favorite guest was Bob Hope, it's reasonable to assume that he had other remarkable guests who left an impression on him and his viewers. Among the notable guests on The Tonight Show was Frank Sinatra, another entertainer and vocalist. Keep in mind that Sinatra was notoriously shy and that very few people dared to ask him questions during the few interviews he did agree to. On The Tonight Show with Don Rickles by his side, Sinatra might be seen roasting someone from time to time. Everything was fine and harmless after all. It allowed Sinatra to relax to the point where he could showcase his unique personality. At the tender age of 7, Drew Barrymore was overjoyed to sit on the couch of The Tonight Show. She has long wished to meet the famous Carson since starring in Steven Spielberg's E.T. She told the talk show presenter that she had always wanted to meet him. During his 1976 appearance on The Tonight Show, the famous filmmaker and radio host shared some wise commentary. When asked about his favorite kind of entertainment media, Wells boldly said that listening to the speaker on the radio was the finest. This is an example of how he demonstrated how individuals who watch excessive television are unable to focus on the content being presented. So there is proof that backs up Wells' claims even today. His appearance on The Tonight Show, where he made light of Carson's situation, stands out among his television performances. Another great addition to The Tonight Show was American actor and comedian Robin Williams. He was clearly gifted, and his boundless enthusiasm proved he was still a young genius on the cusp of greatness. His debut on Carson will be remembered by many, even if he appeared on other variety shows. In 1982, Johnny Carson was updated on Cronkite's life since his last show by Walter Cronkite, one of the most famous American newscasters of all time. Similar to Wells' interview, Cronkite's visit was illuminating since he and Carson discussed the issues plaguing TV news at the period and the objectivity of TV journalists. Together with Carson, they burst out laughing as they watch a rookie reporter's final day on the job. Cronkite was overjoyed to be a part of the program, along with Bob Hope. American comedian Joan Rivers was a guest on The Tonight Show more than 90 times. The enthusiastic response from the audience propelled Rivers to stardom as one of the most popular guest hosts, according to Mix.net. She eventually grew her own television network and ceased appearing on The Tonight Show. Apparently, she boasted to Carson about her over a year-long tenure on the show. As a result of his consistently excellent performances on The Tonight Show, Burt Reynolds rose to prominence in the 1970s. It seemed inevitable that the actor would make regular appearances on the show, given his immense popularity whenever invited. Apparently, Burt Reynolds appeared on Carson's show 61 times in 1984 while she was hosting it. While appearing in Charlie's Angels, Farrah Fawcett promoted her upcoming film, The Burning Bed, on The Tonight Show. In the days leading up to the premiere, Farrah Fawcett made the decision that she would not be appearing on his show again. She portrays a mistreated housewife who, in order to protect her children, decides to set her house on fire. Many people tuned in because her job was so different from what she usually does for her fans and viewers. The actor thoroughly enjoyed discussing her part preparation and the significance of the play with Carson. Even more astounding is the fact that it was in 1995 when Jack Gleason made his sole guest appearance on The Tonight Show. Just seeing Gleason make a terrific guest appearance on The Tonight Show was enough. Kermit the Frog made an appearance on The Tonight Show alongside Jim Henson, who is generally regarded as the most famous puppeteer of all time. Due to the entertaining and humorous banter between Kermit and Carson, the spectators and audience members couldn't help but chuckle the whole performance. It would be careless, of course, to leave out Don Rickles' name. He has been a guest on Johnny Carson's The Tonight Show more than 100 times, which makes him one of the most popular guests in show history. This insult comic was a huge hit with the audience, and the comedian was clearly the showstopper. Among Carson's prominent visitors in 1989 was none other than Jay Leno, who would subsequently host the show. Despite Fred Savage's status as the episode's headline guest, Jay Leno's brilliant comments, which led to a comical exchange with Carson, took center stage. It was fun to see Carson interacting with Leno, the show's future presenter, even though Leno wouldn't take over as host for 3 more years. It was a wonderful reminder that Jay Leno deserved the opportunity to thrive and succeed comically after Carson. Please subscribe and like the video if you enjoyed it, and don't forget to turn on notifications so you won't miss any future uploads. Till then, keep shining brightly.